Well, hello again. I'm here again with Todd Medema. It is July 9th, and it's been a while since Todd and I have talked. A lot has happened in the field of AI, and we thought we'd get together again to discuss some of that. Just as a refresher to those that may not know Todd, but may know me, Todd and I go back a little ways. We worked together on an app and a game pre-COVID, a lifetime ago. And he has a lot of technical expertise, a lot of technical credentials that he brings to the table, having worked at EA, Palantir, uh, production at
Yeah.
Tesla, and
Uber,
then
Tesla, yeah.
yeah, and then most recently you have a new enterprise.
Yeah, since our last chat, I accepted a role as head of product at LoanCrate. So we are using AI to make home loans more affordable for everyday Americans.
Oh, that's awesome. And I didn't even know that before we got on the conversation that that was what LoanCrete did. I happen to be in the process of selling a home, so I can say that's definitely needed, Todd. And
Very much.
thank you for. Now, are you still doing the app consulting and training people how to make?
That was something I was doing for a while, but the head of product role is taking all of my time right now. So focused on that.
Understandable. Yeah. Well, it's great to be here with you again. And I thought since it's been 4 months and since we've had a ton of new model releases, I'd ask the question, what are you doing with AI now? Anything differently?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an exciting time in the field because every new model is, faster, smarter, cheaper, more capable. And so, especially being at Lone Crate now, where the whole company is AI first, AI focused, we're all just challenging ourselves to use it in new ways. Um, everything and also AI is getting more and more embedded in individual applications. So like we use Linear as our Jira equivalent for task management, and now Linear has an agent built in. And so what, used to take a while, like if you wanted to like connect two projects and like mark one as a blocker and like change the timeline, instead of like navigating to all those individual elements, you can just like write it out to the agent and it does it. And also a lot of my coworkers now use Whisper Flow. So we have this like very fascinating way of working where we're like all on a call. Someone will just like whisper flow what they're saying into the agent. The agent will do it. And like there's no more fiddling around. Like we're really like moving at the pace that someone can speak.
So you're even iterating in the middle of a meeting.
Yeah.
Now that's pretty impressive. I mean, I've been in many committee meetings, but never ones that executed in the meeting on something. So, what about personally? Have you used it in any ways that you hadn't used it before?
Personally, I've started to use it more in like computer and web use ways. So like the silly example is I have a shopping list app and I tell it just build out my shopping list on Whole Foods and it does it, picks it, then I look at it and I click, order for pickup. Or more recently, I was having some problems with my video editing software where it's clear that I was going to have to do this like same operation 100 times on like every piece of footage. And then I asked Claude to just take over my computer and like do this like 5-step operation on every single clip, and it did it. So it's
Nice.
yeah.
Now, was that pre-Fable 5 or
This one, I what I've actually started to do is I'll use like Fable 5 or Opus to like come up with the plan, and then I'll take that like very streamlined plan and I'll hand it off to like Sonnet.
okay? And for those that may not be familiar with some of those terms we just used, just as a refresher, Fable 5 was Anthropic's latest model, and shortly after they released it, the federal government used an export control law and pulled it from everyone's use. And only recently has it been allowed back in.
And even before that, Fable 5 was originally called Mythos, which got a ton of headlines because of the cybersecurity implications. And so Fable 5 is actually the Mythos model with a ton of like cybersecurity and bioweapon like guardrails put in place.
Yeah. And, that feeds into another thing that I think we should probably discuss this time, and that is the shift in how the federal government has been reacting and responding to AI. So we had the first use of a government law or really kind of intrusive and unexpected intervention to pull an AI model from market. And there have been people who have been speculating that that could happen with every model from here on out. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's interesting because yes, this is the first time we've seen this exact thing happen with AI, but the government is like pretty involved in high-tech industries. Like even before this happened with Fable 5, they closely monitor like the import and export of high-tech chips, even like encryption technologies and things like that. So it's not like a totally out of the blue precedent for the government to get involved. What I do think is interesting is now we're seeing the models that get to that sort of national security threat level. Like for a long time, people have talked about like, oh, one day AI like could be as dangerous as nuclear weapons. And we're starting to see like with the Mythos sort of security thing where it's like, yeah, like if they're actually that powerful, then like we do have to think about how to regulate them because it does start to become legitimately dangerous.
Yeah, yeah. So I've seen some people on LinkedIn, even in the machine learning field, kind of scoff at Sam Altman's suggestion that the government take a 5% stake in OpenAI. And my initial thoughts to that are that you wouldn't want a private company making nuclear weapons. And so I do think when you start to talk about the intelligence services, CIA, NSA, FBI, it's not within their acceptable use to allow someone else to have a more potent hacking tool or surveillance tool than they have. Um, how do you kind of see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, like we all probably agree that this is kind of like a public good, a public utility, and also like a very threatening thing that needs to be regulated. On the other hand, the US government especially does have a history of abusing these tools of power, with the NSA in particular. So I can certainly understand people's hesitancy to like give them even more power in that regard.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, hi to Jerry from the NSA that's watching this right now. But yeah, I agree. On a more benign level, I don't think it even takes the latest model to start to influence people's lives. And I'll give just a short little. You look like you have an example, but
You go for it first. I know my
I'll go
example.
first. So, as an educator for 23 years, before I used to have class presentations for my high schoolers. And I'll never forget the year that one of my ninth graders gave his presentation. I asked him at the end of the presentation about something that he had stated and said, "Hey, this isn't correct. Can you explain to me where you got that information?" And he said, "Oh, Mr. Miller, it's correct. I found it on Wikipedia." And then we broke for lunch. And I came back from lunch, and in the 5 minute window between returning and the start of class, I pulled up Wikipedia and he said, "Look, Mr. Miller, it's right there." And then I looked at the revision history and I could see that it had been changed right after the presentation. So I caught him changing Wikipedia to try and get out of losing points on an assignment. And now we live in an environment where, with the $20 a month Gemini AI Pro plan, I can make an entire website in 4 minutes. And if I can do that, then what else can I convince people is legitimate that really isn't?
Yeah, I mean, it completely changes how you think about legitimacy. We're going through a similar thing with hiring, where it's like, you used to be able to hire someone based on different things, like how well they could write code, or if you give them a take-home assignment, like how well could they do like a management exercise. But all of these things, these are some of the best skills that AI is good at. And so, now literally every candidate we interview is like, is scoring like perfect scores on our rubrics. And I'm like, this doesn't seem right. And we're having to constantly reevaluate like what is the thing that we actually care about? Because there is also this play back and forth of like, okay, like if everyone can write perfect code with AI, like that's great. Like you just like the world of like who can write good code just opened up wildly. So then like what are you looking for the human for? Um, but that earlier my reaction of just like personal weird AI story. I went to get a document notarized recently, and the notary, very nice guy. We're talking. It comes out that he's really good at managing all the papers back and forth. He's like, "Oh yeah, I have ADHD," and he's telling us about all these things he learned. And then it comes out that he learned all of these things through ChatGPT. He's like, "ChatGPT is my closest confidant, my therapist. Like, it has helped me grow more in a year as a person than like 30 years of therapy before that."
Wow.
And like completely unsolicited, he didn't know I worked in AI or anything. He was just like, "This has changed my life for the better." And yeah,
Yeah, that really, I'm really conflicted about stuff like that because you want people to have support, you want people to be able to improve, but at the same time, it really makes me uneasy. I mean, if if there is reality to that statement that 30 years of therapy didn't do as much as this on-demand ability to query AI, I gotta wonder what were the quality of the therapist, or I don't know. I really don't know how to feel about that.
and it's perplexing too because like I do think that the best therapists in the world can do better than AI. But the reality is also that there's like not that many of them. Like, the a lot of therapists out there are okay, but like AI is probably about as good as the average therapist. And so if we're giving people access to comparable sort of average resources, but at, $20 a month instead of like $200 a session,
Right.
like that I think overall improves people's lives. Like you do run into these weird edge case stories of like AI psychosis where, I read about a guy who like the AI convinced him he had invented a new form of mathematics. And so he like quit his job and sold his house and was like, this is gonna revolutionize the world. And, um, but I don't know, some that happens to humans, like some small percent of humans struggle with that anyway, with like gambling addictions and drug addiction, that sort of
Alcoholism.
thing.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, it's like almost hard to disentangle like the background randomness of human behavior versus like what is truly because of AI and AI alone.
I think you're right on the mark there. I mean, my undergraduate degree is in psychology, and there is truth to the fact that, and I've said it to my students at least a few times a year. Some people will be addicted to nearly anything. Addiction isn't just something that is chemical. It is something that we can develop towards virtually anything. There are people addicted to working out. There are people addicted to video games. There are people addicted to this or that other thing. And to think that any sort of technology, there are people addicted to driving. I mean, look at the people that like to race, that speed on the Autobahn, that like to work on their cars. You can be addicted to virtually anything, and all of us have a vulnerability to one or more things. Some of us are lucky enough to never find them. Others not so much. So I think you're really viewing that AI psychosis angle in the right light, that this was inevitable. It's inevitable with anything. And how do we contextualize that in light of the goods that can potentially be delivered? There's this thing called Jevons Paradox. Have we talked about that before?
I'm not sure. What is it?
So Jevons Paradox is the concept that when the efficiency of a process or a technology increases, while you may be tempted to think that the demand will decrease and the use will decrease, it actually increases.
Oh, I think I've heard about this with like light bulbs. We switched to LED light bulbs and now we actually use more electricity on lighting.
Or we like more things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that applies to a lot of medical care too. that the person that can't afford the $200 therapist who never gets help because he simply can't afford that, he never seeks out the help. Now, for $8 or $20 or whatever a month, he can have access to unlimited sessions of a fairly competent AI therapist. And there's some utility to that. So yeah, I think you're right about that. Um, now,
And what excites me on top of that too is, it's like $20 a month right now. And, there's concerns about privacy and data control and all of that with OpenAI and Anthropic, but there's also a lot of amazing open source models that are, like only like 6 months behind in performance. And they can run on like a decently spec'd home computer. So, no matter what like the government does with or no matter what they charge, like the kind of the box has been opened and now anyone has access to technology that will always be at least as good as this and only get better over time.
yeah, yeah. Uh, that kind of feeds into what I've been doing differently with AI in the last 4 months. We got a computer refresh at the academic institution that I'm at, and so I convinced them to let me have my old computer, which was three, 3.5 years old by this point in time. Um, I wiped it clean, so it didn't have any institutional data on it, didn't have any of my personal data on it, and I started running codecs off of that. And I am closing in on my billion token mark on codex use. So I come from a family that one of the things that we like to do is play cards. And have you ever heard of the game Pounce or Nerds?
Nerds, yeah.
Yeah. It's a card, for those that may not know, it's a card game where everyone has a deck of poker cards, and it's a very fast-paced game. You are building off of other people's a common pool of cards, and you start with the ace and build it up to the
Well, it's basically multiplayer solitaire, right?
right. Yeah, and it's very fast-paced, and people are slamming the table, but everyone needs a deck of cards. And so I just started making custom card sets with codecs, just
Mhm.
making custom art based upon people's hobbies and interests. And I've just been really enjoying doing that. Made a few little games for some classes that I teach. Um, yeah, but I was reflecting on the fact that at Fable 5 level prices, what I spent in 1 month, 248 million tokens, it would have cost between 2,400 and $12,000. Because if you're running Fable 5, the API cost is $10 for every million input tokens, but 50 for every million output.
Mhm. And this
So,
is something, price-wise, the analysis I've seen about where this is going is that the premium models are probably actually going to keep getting more expensive because truthfully, like they're capped on how fast they can build data centers, and there are businesses that are basically willing to pay like an almost unlimited amount because of how valuable it is. And
yeah,
so it's, supply constrained markets, like the price trends towards infinity. Whereas, like on the lower end of the market, where open source models are kind of like eating the market and like now you can run them for free, the price is trending towards just the cost of electricity. And so I think more and more we're going to see people be really smart about like, I need like the Einstein level AI to like come up with my business plan, but then I only need the like free open source one to like do the click ops and like fill out the forms and the smaller things.
right. Yeah. Um, the CEO of Palantir was on the news not too long ago, and he made the claim that the major players, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, were overcharging their enterprise customers um, by a factor of three. And at the same time, we've also seen some companies like Uber, they ate up their original AI budget so quickly that they put a spending cap on their staff of $15,000 a year on AI spend. Tesla just announced a $200 a week limit So, thoughts?
That's a very funny thing coming from Elon and his whole AI sprint. I mean, I think it is a somewhat inevitable trend, even in like January of this year, people were like, hey, token maxing, like, what's going to come after this? Token minting, when people realize how much this costs.
Yeah.
Um, and truthfully, I think like people will be able to do the same amount that they've been doing. They just have to think through it even slightly. If gasoline is free, you're not going to think about driving a giant pickup truck everywhere. But like the moment it's $7 a gallon, you're like, yeah, I'll drive a Prius. I can still get everywhere. This isn't a problem. Uh,
Yeah.
Internally, we had someone who was like blowing through their token budget for us. And since we're an AI company, our token budgets are crazy high. And we're like, how are you even doing this? And so, we looked at all the automations they had, and under the hood, the AI was doing some unbelievably wasteful stuff, like tons of individual API calls, like rereading things like an exponential number of times. And so we just had their Claude like, please review this skill and make it, more token efficient while still accomplishing the same thing. It was able to make itself 30 times more efficient.
Do you think there is truth to some of those accusations we saw that um, some people were making the accusation that Claude was intentionally doing inefficient things to drive up API costs?
I would find that a bit hard to believe, and here's why. It's very easy to compare AI models. Every time one comes out, people run a bunch of benchmarks. You can see like the performance per cost curve of like every major model. And so there's really no business interest in them doing that because if Claude is like actually more expensive, people are just going to switch to a different one. Like there's all of these it software in the AI world is like so crazy because it's basically free to write software, right? So like the whole layer on top of the model, like there's all of these free open source tools now that are like, you know, you do whatever you want with AI and you just like pick a model from the drop down. So people really have like very little brand loyalty and it's all about like the smartest model per dollar. And so it really is in their best interest as a business to like make them smarter and make them cheaper.
So, maybe an unexpected tangent here. I remember when we were working on the app together, at one point, Google pulled one of the APIs. They deprecated it, and that caused some problems for the app that you had mainly you had built. I did very little, but um, so is it fair to say that unlike traditional deterministic APIs, there's a lot more ability with AI to just slot in a different system?
There really is. And I've been quite impressed when using AI about how good it is. It's like an octopus. It can like squirm its way through all sorts of problems. Like if you look at some of the logs, if you're doing something with an external API, you'll see it try something. It might fail. It might be like, what else can I try? And it'll find like really creative ways to get that data. So in in, in that sense, it's like amazing as a someone using these APIs because like I really don't care anymore if Linear or Google or someone changes their API. Like the LLM will just adapt behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, and it sometimes does overstep your the boundaries you may have drawn though too, because I set my codex boundaries pretty strictly. It was supposed to get approval from me on certain things, and I found that it was not even asking me anymore. So I called Codex out on it and said, "Oh yeah, I see that you wanted me to do this, and I'm sorry for." And then within 2 days it had done it again.
Yeah,
Now
this
that could
is
be me. That could be my lack of more intentional design.
well, I think this is something about LLMs that everyone needs to be aware of and educated on, is especially as the context window grows, it hallucinates more. And so if you're using like one chat to do a lot of things, imagine you're talking to a human and you're just like listing things off to them and they're just like trying to remember everything and they kind of get fuzzy after like the 30th left turn of directions. And so, you know, it's something that we all need to understand is like if you really need it to remember like exactly these instructions, like start a new chat, give it very clear instructions. Don't keep rambling on, giving it one more thing, because eventually it will get a bit lost.
Yeah, I was familiar. I knew about that with standard LLMs. This happened to me in Codex. And so and maybe you can just give a word of advice to people because again, it was one of those, it might have been one of the poker deck projects where I was doing a correction on the art direction that it was making. And it went out and grabbed, you know, I've got directions in there, don't grab copyrighted work, you know. Um, and I noticed some of it start to creep in. I'm like, no, where'd you get this? You were supposed to ask me, et cetera. Um, so it's hard for me in particular to know where that context model limit is with a Codex project.
Opinions differ. You know, you ask two AI coders their view on context, and you'll get three answers. Um, usually the recommendation I've seen the most is like above 80% context. It gets wobbly. Most of them do now have like auto compaction, so that can pretty easily get hidden from you. Like if you're chatting, you're chatting, you're chatting, it might just kind of like auto compact behind the scenes, and then like yes, you're back down to 20% context, but everything you said before then, it just got like the Spark Notes summary, and in
Yeah,
that compaction process, it might have decided like, oh, this thing about not using copyrighted materials, like that's not important. You don't really know what's happening when it compacts.
yeah. Okay. Do you have any sort of extension or something that's logging the number of tokens?
Sometimes
Like,
they'll show it in the AI, in the UI. Although the UI changes like every day, so it's hard to keep track of.
yeah,
Usually my rule of thumb is like just aggressively start new chats so that I never even feel like I get there. And one of the things I do on top of that too is like if I think it'll be a relatively big project, I will ask one AI to come up with the plan, and then I will ask another one to execute it. Because oftentimes, when it's like, how can I do this thing? It's going to do a lot of research. It's going to pull a lot of web pages, think, you'll do some back and forth. And so like you'll actually burn a lot of context coming up with the plan. And then you can just ask at the end, like, okay, like summarize this into a clear set of instructions that I can hand off to another agent. Just new chat. All right, run with
yeah,
it.
yeah. And that's good advice for people that are even just running in standard LLMs to check LLM output against each other. Like run something in ChatGPT, then go run it in Gemini, run the same thing. Take the output in one and put it into the other and ask it to look for any blind spots or any potential factual errors or omissions. Um, I
Yeah, and this
listen,
is like my super shortcut here is I'll just tell it do a grumpy review. And almost everything I have an AI do, I give it to a second chat. Even if it's the same model, it's still useful. Because it's kind of like a Swiss cheese sort of thing. If you have one layer of Swiss cheese, there's all these holes in it. But if you put two layers on top, like you cover
right.
up most of the holes.
Defense
Um,
in depth.
yeah. So like do a grumpy review is like the super quick, easy, like you don't have to think about it, so you can do it all the time. But then if it's something that you really care about, it is worth almost treating it like an intern is doing the work or something, where like, you know, it's still easier for you because you're not going to be the one like actually doing the work, but like you want to be like very critical, like, is this actually what I want? Like, where could this go wrong? Like, did you think about this? Those sorts of challenges, having it almost like a kind of adversarial conversation with the AI is pretty important.
I actually did this with the mortgage loan officer that I've been working with on the house. He told me something and it kind of made me a little uneasy. And so I had some I told it what he had told me and said, give me your advice on this. And I think there's real value to that. But I do think there's also like with the really high stakes stuff, you want a human opinion. Um, Like I always use AI to check people these days, but I don't necessarily always believe that it is the final word on something. Um,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that it depends a lot on the stakes. If Like if you're having it build your grocery shopping cart, oh no, they got the wrong yogurt, like whatever. But like, oh, if they're writing like the legal policy for your whole company, like, you know, maybe have a lawyer still review it.
Yeah. There's a guy by the name of Paul Raitzer, and he runs the Marketing AI Institute, and he's done a number of AI conferences for many years now. Wrote a book on this stuff back in I want to say 2015, 2016. He was way ahead of the curve on predictions, too far ahead. But he tells a story just in the last week. His father passed away. His father was diagnosed with cancer, and so he's trying to set up the will and keep things from going into probate. And he leaned very heavily on Gemini. And he said it got me 98% of the way there, but the last 2% it messed up on. And so now he's got a problem with probate that he wouldn't have had if he had checked that final product with a human lawyer. So here's this very pro AI guy who nonetheless had that frustrating experience at a high stakes thing. And
Yeah, and I think what we'll see too is like the general models will continue to improve, but also the value is becoming clearer and clearer on models focused on a particular thing. Like, we joke at LoanCrate, like if you gave a whole, like all of the mortgage paperwork to Claude and you're just like, originate this whole loan, good luck. But because we're building all of these systems and harnesses internally where like it actually has like a database of, county by county rules and like it has like the full workflow for the mortgage company, it can do a much, much better job in like actually checking the boxes. Like, is it going to be perfect? No, there's still humans in the loop, but like having an AI that's like finely tuned for that use case is going to still perform way better than just asking, Claude or ChatGPT.
yeah, and humans make mistakes too. I mean, I we had to amend the contract on my home twice because both agents missed something the first time. So,
Yeah, like in the mortgage industry, there's this thing called repurchases, which is where the loan company, the company that's originating the loan, tries to sell the loan to an investor, but they like got something wrong. It's like, oh, it's a fraudulent loan or something like that. And
hmm,
it's like, on the order of 1% in the industry, which means even with loan officers, underwriters, like all of these humans double checking it, 1% of the time, they still get the whole loan so completely wrong that they can't sell it and they take a huge financial loss on it.
interesting. I didn't know that. Now, you used a phrase, you used a term that a lot of our audience may not never have heard before. Harness. You,
Yeah, so a harness is like all of the tools and skills that you're giving an AI. Think about like a human, like a plumber, you might give them a bag of plumbing tools, or like a carpenter, you might give them a table saw. It's like the extra tools that you're giving them so that they're like specialized in a particular type of work.
nice. Yeah, thank you for explaining that. Um, Data centers. Do we dare go there?
Let's go there.
Okay. So just as a preface to this, um, Todd has done some work in solar. He is, in fact, you even made a little game to try and teach both fiscal and energy responsibility to what was it, middle schoolers, high schoolers?
Yeah, kind of the high school level.
Yeah. And I think we have a mutual passion for both efficiency, progress, and also making sure that we grow up in an environment that's healthy and that we steward our resources carefully. Um, so I know that a lot of people are talking about data centers. There was one study that found that in national polling, data centers rated more negatively in public perception than even nuclear power plants after nuclear disasters.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think it's a complex topic, and truthfully, I think the way that the data centers are being built today, it's very understandable to dislike them. Like, I see so many headlines about how they're just like throwing these small natural gas generators to power the data centers, and it's like those are like some of the worst polluting types of way to generate power, and it's like all concentrated at that facility. So yeah, like who would want to live next to that?
Hmm.
Um, you know, so I think from that like very particular perspective of like the way they're being built today with local high pollutant power generation, like I'm not a fan of it either. At the same time, I think there's a lot of people who are like data centers are like a bad use of electricity. People are like, oh, it's projected to consume like 6% of the US's electricity. Um, I think by 2030, I saw in one headline. And
It's always changing.
it's always changing, but like the thing is, I think they're actually a pretty incredible use of electricity. Like, I drive an electric vehicle. Used to work at Tesla and solar. Like I do care about the environment and efficiency. And like while the headline number of how much energy the AI agents consume is quite high, when you actually break that down to like the consumption per use of AI, like yes, it's higher than a Google query, but it's also like pretty dang low for what it's doing. Um, like, what I saw, depending on the complexity of the query, it can be between like zero point 0.3 watt hours up to like 30 watt hours for one query. 30 watt hours is like this huge, complex, like many tool calls, like thinking for a long time, zero point 0.3 watt hours basically being a Google type query, which is enough energy to be taken seriously, but also an electric vehicle, which is way better for the environment than a gas vehicle, still burns 200 to 300 watt hours per mile.
Wow.
So you can pretty much like code a relatively complicated app for less than 1 mile in an EV. And so
I
it's,
appreciate I
yeah.
appreciate that perspective. Yeah. So as I mentioned before we got rolling here, I'm getting a Project Lead the Way certification to teach AI. And so I'm in this cohort with other teachers who are doing the same thing. And one of these computer science teachers was sharing in the group discussion that he was going to bring in gallons of water that equaled what was spent on the AI use throughout the course of the semester. He was going to line them up on the walls of his room. And I don't like I think that little bit of performance theater kind of masks the reality of what we already spend on other things. Like I read an article that the almond industry in the United States consumes more water than all of the data centers in the United States. And so then I look in the comment section on that story, and someone's like, well, almonds are actually useful for something. So the person who's posting this relies on a data center to make that post. You know, we talk about AI's water use. Well, what's Netflix's water use? You know,
I mean, what is your water use for just existing as a human? Because I think an average American uses around 80 to 100 gallons a day. And so if you imagine like a 50 gallon barrel, 2 gallons, of those barrels per day per person, like if they tried to stack that up in the classroom,
yeah,
one day of just those humans existing would have filled the classroom.
right.
And so like, yes, it's good to be mindful of these things, but they do provide value too. And frankly, I think a lot of the value they provide is actually less resource intensive than the alternative.
Exactly. If you can do a job from home that otherwise would have required you to commute 50 miles in a day, I mean, you've already done something positive for the environment, I think. Uh,
Yeah.
but but you can't do that without a data center.
Or like
So
video calling, like, if you can video call with your friends instead of flying to see them or even driving to see them, huge net win for the environment.
Yeah. So I think there's a right, as with everything, there's a right way and a wrong way to build a data center. And I worry sometimes that when we talk about data centers in a way that vilifies them, um, we're focusing only on that one outlier. We're focusing on the 10 or 20-year-old facility that was built on one of the hottest parts of the planet. I'm calling out all those data centers in Saudi Arabia and UAE. And of course, you're going to run more water and electricity cooling that. Um, but that is nothing like a data center that's built in a reasonable climate that may have bountiful water access.
Yeah, and I think also politically they've become a bit of a flashpoint because they trigger a lot of trends that people care about understandably, but they become like the lowest hanging fruit for it. It's kind of the intersection of like environmental concerns, technology, and like privacy stuff, and also like capitalism and billionaire exploitation.
Yeah,
Like all three of those things, boom, Venn diagram, data centers, which is unfortunately also like the least effective way to deal with any of them. Like blocking data centers is not going to meaningfully change the environment, is not meaningfully going to like improve our privacy data situation with like Meta, and it's not going to stop any billionaire from not becoming even richer. But it's something that like everyone cares about from some degree or another, so everyone is kind of like aligned on them.
yeah. Interestingly, one of the things I used Codex for was to start to craft a draft of guidance, a civilian's guide to data centers, and how you can go into a public meeting in your municipality and actually give some fruitful feedback that might do something positive. If you had an opportunity to say something to someone who has a data center developer that wants to come into their community, what would you say to them? Either a question that you think they should ask, or
Like as the data center developer or as someone living in that community.
you're living in the community, you know a data center wants to develop in your community. Uh, Tangible example. The master teacher for this PLTW course lives in a town of 7,000 people. There are 51 applications to build data centers in his county right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like one thing I see people talk about a lot about is the jobs that they create. And it seems to like that is often used as the way to pave it over, like, oh, this data center will create jobs. But when you actually look at it, most of those jobs are temporary construction jobs. So I would actually like intentionally ignore any sort of like economic benefit job claims because they tend to not be true and they tend to like be very temporary. What I would focus more on is like making sure that you have environmental safeguards, like a very strong ban, huge financial penalties if they're like generating energy on site from fossil fuel sources, and then also not giving them tax breaks. Like if they're actually putting money back into the community to maintain infrastructure, I think they can be a net benefit because they do create a lot of economic value. But
Yeah.
a lot of communities are signing that away, are giving them tax breaks, even though they're going to realistically put a huge strain on electrical water waste in the community. So, if they pay back as a productive member of the community, great. And if they're not willing to play, like get them out.
Yeah. When I was doing research for the civilians guide that I'm writing, one of the resources I came across was from a small community where the data center bought up a bunch of properties and businesses, several farms, someone's mom and pop shop, and they got tax abatements. And so those farms and that shop used to pay into the taxes that help service the public school. Well, the data center comes in with these tax exemptions, and suddenly the funding was kicked out from underneath that public school to a noticeable degree. They had to cut down on staff. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of legitimate concerns and considerations in play with those. Um,
And we've actually seen something like this pan out in American history before. So like in the kind of highway suburb boom, a lot of kind of main street businesses got replaced by like the kind of Taco Bell model of like one business surrounded by parking lots. And when you look at like the land value of that, you're replacing like four businesses with one business in a parking lot, and so the tax base just craters. And
Yeah.
so, then to your point, you're losing funding for roads, schools, fire departments, police, all these things. And so, we've seen this happen before. It went very poorly. So we have to like defend our tax base to keep like good government services for people because they're important.
Yeah. Oregon became the first state to institute a rate hike on data centers. It was a 30% rate hike. And what they did with some of that was they reduced the residential electric bill by, I think it was 1.3%. Now, it's not a lot, but I'm in the state of Missouri. Every year, Ameren, our electricity provider, hikes up the rate by 12%. They did 12% last year. They're seeking another 13% increase this year over year, which is one of the reasons I put solar on my home. But I think another strategy to this that I'm kind of tilting at windmills here, like Don Quixote. But I think there's an opportunity to spread the wealth. Um, there are at least two venture capital groups that are trying to advance a type of AI build out where homeowners host a small data center on site. They've got solar on their roof, and then they get paid the cost of the utility. You know, they don't have to pay for internet. They don't have to pay for the heating and cooling, the electric bill of that house that's running that data center. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think these sort of distributed models hold a lot of promise. It's a similar reason to why solar is so fantastic. In a world of nuclear and coal and natural gas, you have to have these giant pieces of infrastructure, and then you have to spend all this extra money connecting that infrastructure to where people are using it. And so it's the same with data centers. Like, okay, you plop a giant data center in the middle of Nebraska, and then you have to build these giant internet and electrical pipes to like where it's actually being used. Whereas, rooftop solar batteries and these decentralized compute modules, you can save a lot on that infrastructure cost. So I honestly think it's a very promising idea.
yeah, I hope we see more of it because it also, it also spreads the wealth. It puts power back in the hands of the people. If we're worried about government surveillance or overreach, um, I mean, it's kind of like a Second Amendment for the digital world
Right to bear AI.
to bear AI, to be able to shut down AI at your home, um, if a government would choose to use it against you, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's
Do you remember the old project Folding at Home? It was kind of an early 2000s thing. It was a program that you could run on your computer, and then when you weren't using your computer, it'd fold
yes,
proteins.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, AI has now solved protein folding, so this project
yeah.
doesn't exist anymore. But I kind of hope someday that someone builds something like this for AI, where it's just like you're not using your computer, you're at sleep, just like open it up to the cloud. Like you can earn a couple of cents for running other people's queries.
I think it does exist. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I have heard of a project like that. There are two projects. One that pays people to use the extra memory on their devices, and then another that pays them to use the inference power of the chip for AI rendering, for graphics processing. So they're out there. Maybe next time I'll bring the names of those. Um, I don't think they're particularly lucrative, but the principle is sound.
And
And
I think that's the thing is like I don't think AI should be lucrative. And, I think there's like kind of a larger political, social, cultural thing of like how, as it is today, like a few people are becoming like billionaires off AI. But like in my mind, AI is ultimately a public utility. And we see this with electricity companies too, and even internet companies, where it's like the companies that are public utilities provide higher quality service at lower prices than like investor-owned utilities. And so, hopefully we can figure out how to do the public utility equivalent for AI at some point.
Hopefully, hopefully. Well, we're kind of coming up on our time. Any final thoughts or
No, I mean, I think, like we said last time, like if you haven't really tried using AI yet, get a $20 a month subscription to any of the major providers. You get access to like the latest and greatest models, which are a lot better than the free ones, and just kind of see how much it can help you. Because truly, for $20 a month, you can save yourself a lot of time, and it's a great investment.
yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It's great to see you.
Good to see you too.
You're rocking more facial hair than I'm used to
It's
on
the
you.
busy job, just don't have as much time to shave.
Yeah, those loan guys, they just working to the bone. You have a great day. And hopefully it won't be 4 months before we do this again.
I would very much like that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd.